Anti-Federalist number 4 is Centinel number 1. It's an essay written by a guy named Samuel Bryan, writing under the pen name Centinel. He wrote a series of essays arguing against the new United States Constitution that came out of the Constitutional Convention, saying largely that local government was much better for the new states and their needs. The letters of Centinel were letters written by Samuel Bryan. You can see here an important anti-federalist thinker, and Centinel was an alias he used to write a series of 18 articles. These were printed in the Philadelphia Independent Gazetteer and the Philadelphia Freeman's Journal between October 5th, 1787 and April 9th, 1788. So big series of these essays that went out. Historians generally say that a majority of these were written by Samuel Bryan. However, some of these may have been written by his father, George Bryan, and Eleazar Oswald, somebody else of the Independent Gazetteer. So a lot of people writing under these pen names to protect their identities and their families and their reputations and their businesses. And so a little bit more about Samuel Bryan before we dive in, since this is the first time we've heard of him. He was born in Philadelphia, resident of Pennsylvania, anti-federalist author, wrote a lot during the Confederation period. Pseudonym Centinel for a long period of time, says that the proposed Constitution of the United States was in the interest of the well-born few and against the actual people. Wrote a series of essays, the first of which starts now. Centinel I. He writes, "Permit one of yourselves to put you in mind of certain liberties and privileges secured to you by the Constitution of this Commonwealth." Talking about the state constitution. Think about the liberties and the privileges that your current state constitution gives you, and to beg your serious attention to his uninterested opinion upon the plan of the federal government submitted to your consideration before you surrender these great and valuable privileges forever. Think about what your current constitution gives you. Think about what the federal constitution is promising you, and ask yourselves why you're giving up certain liberties from your state constitution under this new plan. Once you give them up, they're going to be gone forever. It says your present frame of government in your state right now secures to you a right to hold yourselves, your houses, your papers, your possessions free from searches and seizures, and therefore warrants granted without oaths and affirmations first made. You're free from illegal searches and seizures. You're free from unlawful warrants, because those are in the state constitutions. But remember, they're not in the Bill of Rights on this new constitution yet. He says currently you have the right affording sufficient foundation for those warrants that must have probable cause in those concepts, whereby any officer or messenger may be commanded or required to search your houses or your property, not particularly described in the warrant, shall not be granted. He's saying that there are limits on issuing warrants. And that's not in the new Constitution. Why do you have that now but not there? He says your Constitution also gives you a lot of other rights that you don't see in the federal Constitution. It says that in controversies about property, the parties have a right to a trial by jury, which ought to be held sacred. It says also your Constitution says that you have a right of freedom of speech and of writing and publishing in their sentiments, and therefore freedom of the press. But the Constitution of Pennsylvania is yet in existence, as yet you have the right to freedom of speech and publishing your sentiments. That you don't have that in the new Constitution, but you do in the old one. How long those rights will appertain to you, yourselves are called upon to say, whether your houses shall continue to be your castles, whether your papers, your persons, your property are to be held sacred or free from general warrants. Well, you're going to find out. Okay, they're telling you that that's all covered in this new document. But you're going to find out because it's not written in there. Whether the trial by jury is to continue as your birthright, the free men of Pennsylvania, nay, of all America, are now called upon to declare. Do you still have that right? Yes or no? He says, I'm a little bit concerned about this. I am fearful that the principles of government inculcated by Mr. Adams' treatise and enforced in the numerous essays and paragraphs in the newspapers have misled some well-designing members of the late convention. But it will appear in the sequel that the construction of the proposed plan is infinitely more extravagant. It says, I have been anxiously expecting that some of the enlightened patriots out there, ere this, have taken upon the pen to expose the futility and to counteract the baneful tendency of such principles. Mr. Adams, sine qua non of good government, is three balancing powers whose repelling qualities are to produce an equilibrium of interests and thereby promote the happiness of the whole community. He says that the administrators of every government will be actuated, they'll be moved and governed by private interest and ambition. They're going to pit their ambition against one another to the prejudices of the public good. And he says that therefore, the only effectual method to secure the rights of the people and promote their welfare is to create an opposition of interest between the members of the two distinct bodies in the exercise of the powers of government, balanced by the powers of a third. We've talked a lot about this. The three co-equal branches of government with checks and balance. The drafters of the original Constitution were thinking that men would be governed by their self-interest, by their own personal ambitions. And so if you create these three co-equal branches of government and you put self-interested individuals in those branches, well, they're all going to be clawing for power and resources, and they'll be fighting in a way that's going to create this balance, this harmony. And he's saying that that's going to ultimately result in a benefit to the public. Here, Bryan is saying, how is that going to work? Because let's say a government could be formed and supported on those principles. Would it actually answer the great purposes of civil society? If the administrators of every government are actuated by views of private interest and ambition, how is the welfare and the happiness of the community to be the result of the adverse interests? How could that happen? It says it would not be difficult to prove that anything short of despotism could not bind so great a country under one government. If you're going to bring this all under one house, the only way you can do it is with despotism. And that whatever plan you might at the first setting out establish, it would issue in a despotism. You can call it a constitution if you want to. You can say this is a democratic republic, madam, if you'd like, but it's ultimately going to result in despotism. It says if one general government could be instituted and maintained on the principles of freedom, it would not be so competent to attend to the various local concerns and wants of every particular district, as well as the peculiar governments who are nearer to the scene and possessed of superior means of information. If we actually operate on freedom, then that government can't go out and solve every single person's problem. All of those problems are better left to the local governments. Besides, if the business of the whole union is to be managed by one government, there would not be time to even handle it all. It's too much business for one government to attend to. And he gives us an example. He says, do we not already see that the inhabitants in a large number of these larger states who are remote from the seat of government are loudly complaining of the inconveniences and the disadvantages they are subjected to on this account, and that to enjoy the comforts of local government, they are separating into smaller divisions. That even then, in the late 1700s, some people were tired of their big, annoying, gigantic, ineffective government bureaucracies, and they were saying, man, it'd be really nice to just get out of these cities and get a little space and peace and quiet and competent local governance. Back in the 1700s. Sounds pretty good here in the 2022s, doesn't it? Let me know what you think down in the comments below, and I'll see you on the next one.